From Conor McGregor backing Diaz to Jake Paul focusing on bouncing back from a loss, here's what pros think of the Nate Diaz and Jake Paul bout. I'm going to start off strong with Mystic Mac's prediction. And since he's not fighting in the UFC anytime soon, it looks like the Irish MMA artist is filling his time by placing bets on boxing matches. Now, it's not a huge surprise that Conor McGregor, a name synonymous with the UFC, is backing Nate, his fellow UFC fighter. Now that neither Diaz nor Paul can pull out of the fight, Conor's locked in his opinion, and he's not budging at all. According to him, Jake Paul, aka the problem child, should prepare to rack up another boxing loss. The YouTube star just lost his last bout to Tommy Fury, and McGregor's sure that the former UFC star is gonna slap his head off. That's a bold prediction, but it was made in true Conor McGregor fashion. The Irishman's known to love a spectacle, and he sure as heck loves adding fuel to the fire too, because that's exactly what he did when he gave his thoughts on the whole situation to Inside Fighting. The former lightweight UFC champion also added that he's looking forward to the fight, and he's not the only one. Even though McGregor's hyped for the fight, fans shouldn't expect to see him in the crowd at the American Airlines Center on the 5th of August. The Irish fighter is going to be busy partying it up, driving in his Lamborghini somewhere in Sicily. That's one way to celebrate missing the USADA deadline. Since McGregor's so important in the combat sports community, people are dying to know about his thoughts, and the interviewer simply couldn't resist asking him about a potential Diaz UFC comeback, that too in a trilogy bout against him. In response, the Notorious stayed quiet, only holding up 3 fingers. Whether or not Nate wants to return to the UFC is something fans couldn't care less about right now, because millions are going to tune in for his Jake Paul match. Conor McGregor's comments did exactly what he intended for them to, though, since Jake Paul caught wind of them almost immediately. The 26-year-old boxer didn't hesitate to clap back and immediately challenged McGregor himself. Yep, you heard that right. JP wants to take on Conor McGregor in the boxing ring, and he's confident that he's a better boxer than the Irish MMA veteran. He even took it to the next level and said that he's going to do what Mystic Mac couldn't, and that's knocking Nate Diaz out. Honestly though, controversies aside, Jake Paul's a pretty good boxer. He's made a name for himself, and that wasn't by sitting around. In the few short years that he's had a boxing career, Jake Paul boasts impressive wins over UFC stars like Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, and Anderson Silva. Jakey's made his mark, that's for sure. Considering that the YouTuber has defeated so many UFC stars over the years, it's no surprise that so many of them are weighing in with their predictions. Anderson Silva did the same, and he gave a detailed analysis of the odds. The Dancing Spider's 2 cents on the upcoming match are definitely worth listening to, especially because the 48-year-old has a ton of experience. He's faced off against Paul and Diaz both in the ring and octagon respectively, so he knows what he's talking about. In his opinion, Jake Paul's going crazy training, and his current regime is very professional and focused. He confessed to Fight Hub that it's hard to say who's gonna come out on top, because both of them are great fighters. Silva went on to praise Nate Diaz too, saying that he has a lot of experience, along with good boxing skills and cardio. Jake's been around in the fight world for barely a few years, and that's definitely a disadvantage for him. But according to Anderson, he has a good coach, and he's smart when it comes to boxing. The question still remains though, is that going to be enough to take on an MMA veteran like Diaz? After all, this fight isn't just about power. Anderson Silva thinks that it all boils down to timing, and Jake Paul and Nate Diaz have both mastered that skill. It looks like the two are going to cut it real close, which is why it's so hard for Silva to make a prediction. He did admit one thing though, and that's the fact that Nate is a beast. Jake Paul's still a noob, and he's learning and gaining new experiences every day. While on the other hand, fans have grown used to watching Diaz absolutely annihilate his opponents in the octagon. I guess there's only one thing left for fans to do, and that's just waiting for the 5th of August. On one hand, you have UFC fighters weighing in on the bout, and on the other, WBC fighters are also bracing themselves for this fight because it's giving the boxing world a lot to talk about. Tony Bellew is convinced that Jake Paul is going to have huge advantages in the upcoming mega fight. The former WBC Cruiserweight champion talked to Sport Bible about his thoughts, and he's convinced that Diaz is going to give away an awful lot of size to Paul in their fight. He went on to say that Jake Paul's earned the title of a boxer, especially now that he's faced a pro boxer. Tony went on to say that just because the problem child lost doesn't mean that he's not good enough to be a pro. He went on to praise his willingness to get back in the ring and try again. which is why, according to Bellew, you just can't knock him. Nate Diaz is going to have the fight of his life when he goes up against someone like JP, especially because Jake took his first loss to heart. Plus, Tony Bellew thinks that knowing MMA doesn't make you a good boxer, which is why Diaz's years of experience won't make much of a difference to someone like Jake. As if that wasn't enough, it's really hard to ignore the size difference between the two opponents. Nate is going to have to give away an awful lot of size to the 26-year-old, who's not only younger, but also a way bigger opponent than Diaz is used to. I mean, the guy's fought his whole career in the UFC lightweight and welterweight divisions. How do you expect him to compete with a 200-pound-plus Jake Paul? One thing's for sure, Jake's size advantage going into this fight is undeniable. He's going into the fight knowing that he can win, and this confidence is going to help him crush Diaz in the ring. Fans can expect that he's going to study all of the MMA artist's weaknesses and take full advantage of the fact that it's his first professional boxing match. Even though Tony Bellew's on Jake Paul's side for this one, it would have been unfair of him to not mention the 38-year-old MMA star's toughness. After all, he's used to handling back-to-back shots really well. He even managed to tire Conor McGregor out that one time. While pros are predicting that Jake Paul's going to take home the win, the 40-year-old Liverpool-born doesn't think that Paul's going to knock out Diaz. Instead, he's going to win on points, which is definitely an interesting prediction to make. All in all, Tony's predictions explain why most sports bettors are on Jake Paul's side. He's opening as a -270 favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook, while on the other hand, Diaz is expected to be the underdog, with his bets placed at +200 for his pro boxing debut. Even though the problem child is coming off his very first professional loss, he's going to give his best shot to redeem himself. Diaz and Paul's heated rivalry is finally going to be settled in the highly anticipated bout. And I don't know about you, but I just can't wait for it. It's going to be a night to remember, especially since all the odds makers are on the side of a guy who's coming off his first professional loss. At this point, fans can't help but wonder if he's going to become bigger and better after everything's over. If Jake Paul defeats another UFC fighter, he's going to finally silence his doubters and prove that he's a force to be reckoned with. Even though his 6-on-1 record isn't what you'd call unblemished, it's impressive to say the least. Diaz's record looks slightly different at 21-13 for MMA, but he's hoping to turn things around with boxing. I doubt his experience is going to help him too much though, especially because it wasn't enough for Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, or even Anderson Silva. If Nate Diaz wants to beat the odds, he and his team are going to have to work really hard. At this point though, it's not wise to bet on Diaz since all his experience might not mean anything in the face of Jake Paul's fury. I don't know about you, but to me, it looks like this guy is determined as ever after the Fury loss. He's not the same immature YouTuber fans once knew, because he's grown into a mature boxer who actually loves the sport. He went on to say that his loss was just a humbling experience, and that he's gonna focus on bouncing back now. That's impressive. So, from Jake Paul focusing on bouncing back from a loss, to Conor McGregor backing Diaz, this was what pros think of the Nate Diaz and Jake Paul bout.